Genesis chapter 6. We'll begin reading at verse 1 and we'll go all the way down to verse 8 for our reading this evening. Now it happened when men began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were good in appearance, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. Then Yahweh said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he indeed is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Then Yahweh saw that the evil of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And Yahweh regretted that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. And Yahweh said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, from man to animals to creeping things, to birds of the sky, for I regret that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of Yahweh. This evening, we're probably not going to get very far. I'm only going to cover probably the first two verses here. But I want us to consider the sons of God and the daughters of men. So I've mentioned a couple of times when as we've been going through Genesis, I preached through this before in Mansfield. And when I went through this the first time, this is the chapter that made me the most nervous. I didn't get nervous about the days of creation. I didn't get nervous thinking about the age of the earth. I didn't get nervous trying to figure out who was Cain's wife. It didn't bother me to think about whether or not there was a worldwide flood and those sorts of things. Who were the sons of God? This is what concerned me. So the second time around, as we go through it, I feel more confident about it than what I did the first time. As a matter of fact, that first time I went through it, I remember your former pastor. Now, I don't know if he was pastoring here or not at the time, but Brother Doug Newell, he wrote to me. And he said, hey, I know you just went through Genesis. What was your conclusion about the sons of God? And can I see your notes? I said, all right, here they are, but don't think I'm a heretic when you see them. And so I was kind of nervous about those things, but I'm more convinced about my conclusion the more that I've read through the Bible and things. But I also still realize that there are others who have come to different conclusions on these things. And so tonight, what I want to do is not only present my position on this subject, but I want to present the other positions on the subject as well, because this is one of those passages where good and godly men do disagree, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. We're not going to cut fellowship off with somebody because they differ on Genesis chapter 6. So let's look at the text here. Before we get into it, the first thing we notice here, as we mentioned in Genesis chapter 5, that there's multiplication happening. People are having babies. Verse 1, now it happened when men began to multiply on the face of the land, daughters were born to them. There's nothing at all wrong with this. God is not angry at the human race because of this. As a matter of fact, this was part of the creation mandate. In Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 28, if you'll remember, then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, so that they will have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that creeps on the earth. And again, even after the flood, when Noah and his family got off of the ark, God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them in Genesis 9 and verse 1, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. This is the positive of the command when Yahweh said to Moses and the children of Israel in the Ten Commandments, by extension to us, you shall not murder. Our God is a God of life, and he's very much pro-life. And so he is very much pro-family, pro-life. There's no indication that these commandments that were given to Adam and to Noah, that these had expiration dates. God is still very pleased with families. He is not a God who rejoices in abortions. He's not a God who rejoices or is thrilled or is happy with nations who have rebelled against his creative order. In Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 28, Proverbs chapter 14 in verse 28 says, in a multitude of people is a king's splendor, but in the dearth of people is a prince's ruin. And so it's a blessing to a nation when there's families, when there's mommy and daddy having children. Society is blessed by an increase in people. When even in the New Testament, when Paul wrote to Timothy, in 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 14, he wrote and he said, therefore, I want younger widows to get married, bear children. Which, by the way, that's the order. Get married and have children. Keep house and give the enemy no opportunity for reviling. This is God's creative order throughout all times, rather than being a burden, a problem that needs a solution, or any of that, like what a lot of people think in our time. Should be like the psalmist wrote in Psalm 127. Psalm 127 and verses 3, 4, and 5. When he wrote and he said, "Behold, children are an inheritance of Yahweh. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. How blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them." Excuse me. "They will not be ashamed when they speak with enemies in the gate." If you read on down there in chapter 128, verse 1, "How blessed is everyone who fears Yahweh, who walks in his ways. When you shall eat of the fruit of the labor of your hands, how blessed will you be, and how well will it be for you. Your wife will be like a fruitful vine in the innermost parts of your house, your children like olive plants all around your table. Behold, for thus shall the man be blessed who fears Yahweh." And so, children are a blessing, and God is pleased with children. So, what's the deal with Genesis chapter 6? What is it that's happening here? Something must be going on. Because it says, "Now it happened when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men were good in appearance, that they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. Then Yahweh said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he indeed is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. And so we see, and we compare that 120 years with what was going on in chapter 5. 120 years is nothing. That's like a little baby compared to 900 years. So the controversy, the disagreement, the question is, who were these sons of God in this passage? There are three main views among Christian authors, commentators, and preachers. The first view is that it refers specifically to fallen angels. This is the view that I take, and we'll look at that here in a little bit. Secondly, there is a view that says that it refers to the godly descendants of Seth, one of Adam's children. Then there's a third, which is less common, that says that these were kings or rulers who were described as gods. So, why the fallen angel view? Well, the fallen angel view comes in because of other verses within the Old Testament, which give us a good idea of who the sons of God are in other passages. So in Job, so if we go over to the book of Job, chapter 1, Verse 6. Now it was the day that the sons of God came to stand before Yahweh, and Satan also came among them. Chapter 2, verse 1. Again, it was the day that the sons of God came to stand before Yahweh, and Satan also came among them to stand himself before Yahweh. Chapter 38 of Job. Job 38 and verse 7. When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. So all of these passages are speaking of angels. It's the same word in the English, same phrase in English, same phrase in the Hebrew as well. There's other passages that we could look at. For instance, in Psalm, the book of Psalms, chapter 29. Verse 1. Psalms 29 and verse 1. Ascribe to Yahweh, O sons of the mighty. Ascribe to Yahweh glory and strength. That phrase there, O sons of the mighty, that could be translated sons of God or sons of gods. And then also Psalm 89 and verse 6. For who in the sky is comparable to Yahweh? Who among the sons of the mighty is like Yahweh? I'm talking about the angels, the sons of the mighty. Now, when we look at this phrase and we compare that to the daughters of men, it's different. It's a different phrase. It's a different terminology. In the Hebrew, it's a different terminology in the English. Sons of God versus daughters of men. In the Hebrew, it's Benoth Adam. If the sons of God were mortal human beings born of humans, then expression would have been Bene Adam. The text brings out a difference, a distinction given between the two. In the New Testament, Adam, the first man, is called the Son of God because God supernaturally created him, but that's it. And this view about the sons of God being angels or fallen angels, this was common among most ancient commentators and some modern commentators as well. Henry Morris being one. Henry Morris was a creation scientist who influenced Ken Ham. He's often quoted by Ken Ham. He was in the generation before him. Some Baptist preachers that you may have heard of before held to this. Oscar Mink being one of them. Brother Mink wrote on the subject in 1983. I found an article that he wrote. Brother Mink actually pastored the church in Mansfield before me, well, several years before me. He wrote and he said, I am confident that my interpretation of the text will not bring the readers of this article to a consensus of opinion, or for that matter, settle the issue for all those who are halted between two opinions regarding the identity of the sons of God of Genesis 6. However, he said, being on the theological fence calls for a balancing act I find beyond my ability to perform, and straddling the fence is painfully difficult for me. So, in order to alleviate the irritation of my mind concerning the matter in question before us, I began a prayerful study and investigation into the subject. And so he began digging into this, and so he came to the conclusion that it was the angels, fallen angels, no less, but angels. And more recently, if you have MacArthur's Study Bible, you'll notice that this was the view that John MacArthur held to as well. Before we get too deep into this, let's look at a couple other ideas that have come out. And one is that it's the Sethites. Now, there is some weight to this argument. That weight is that this is dealing with the sons of Seth. Go with me, if you will, to Genesis chapter 4. Genesis chapter 4, verses 25 and 26. Then Adam knew his wife again, and she gave birth to a son, and named him Seth, for she said, God has set for me another seed in place of Abel, for Cain killed him. And to Seth, to him also a son was born. He called his name Enosh. Then men began to call upon the name of Yahweh. And so this idea says that the sons of God were descendants from Seth, who began to call upon the name of Yahweh, and that the daughters of men, were descendants of Cain, the evil Cain who murdered, if you remember, murdered his brother Abel. Now, it is true that there were a lot of godly men who came from Seth. However, the problem that I have with this view is that godliness, Christianity, it does not have anything to do with lineage. It doesn't have anything to do with ancestry. And as we will see anyway, by the time we get to the flood, only 8 people got on board the ark. That was it. The rest of the world perished in the flood. Now, out of all of the line of Seth, if they were truly the godly ones, surely there would have been more who would have been spared, who would have gotten on board the ark, and not just those 8. If the line of Seth was intended here, why did the scripture not make it more clear? Why would the Bible use a term like the sons of God when elsewhere the term is used for angels? I just don't believe that. Now, I mentioned some men who held to this view, who held to the previous view. So I'll mention some men who held to this one, and if you dig through your commentators, you'll find some. One of the more famous, at least in our circles, that held to the Seth view would be my grandfather. He held to this view, and so those of you who are familiar with James Hobbes, he held to the view that the Sethites were the sons of God. Whether he still holds to that or not, I don't know. But one of these days, I'm sure we'll talk about it. The kings and rulers view. The kings and rulers view. There are those that hold that the sons of God means kings or rulers. While it's true that there are some ancient rulers, kings, and some modern ones for that matter, who have declared themselves to be gods, once again, it's hard to find any scriptural support for this claim. I don't know anybody who held to this. I just saw it in a book somewhere. But as I journeyed through this back several years ago, and again going through this time, there are some arguments not only for the position I take, but also against it. And so, first of all, let's look at the arguments against it. Argument number one is that angels are spirits, and there's no way that any angel could ever marry a woman, furthermore, father any children. And it's true. Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 14 does declare that they are all ministering spirits. And that's what angels are. But there are a number of things that we do not understand about the spirit world. Indeed, there's a lot of things that we don't understand about the spirit world. Go with me to Genesis chapter 18. Genesis chapter 18 and verse 8. And he took curds and milk and the calf which he had prepared, placed it before them, and he was standing by them under the tree, and they ate. Okay, so he is Abraham, took curds and milk and the calf which he had prepared, and he placed it before them. Who are the them here? Well, the them were angels, including Yahweh. Now, how it's possible that these angels appeared in human form and sat there and ate with Abram, I don't know. But the Bible says that they did. Chapter 19. Yahweh stayed over yonder with Abraham, but chapter 19 and verse 1 says, Then the two angels came to Sodom in the evening as Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. Lot saw them, rose to meet them, and bowed down with his face to the ground. And he said, Behold, my lords, please turn aside into your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go on your way. They said, however, no, but we shall spend the night in the square. Yet he pressed them strongly, so that they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he made a feast for them and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded the house from young to old, all the people from every quarter, and they called to Lot and said to him, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may know them. So these two angels that went with Lot into Sodom, Lot saw them with his eyes. He offered to wash their feet, and he took them inside, made a feast for them, and they ate. Furthermore, the others within the city saw them, these bunch of sodomites, or as we would call them, these homosexuals. They saw them, thought they looked like some very beautiful, gorgeous men, and wanted to go in and have intercourse with them. They didn't, but they saw what they saw. These men ate. I don't know what angels can and can't do, but I know what's clear in the scriptures. And I do know that in Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 2, the Bible says, and let's go ahead and turn there, Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 2. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by this some have entertained angels without knowing it. Angels do have the capability, I believe, even to this very day, of taking on human form and walking among men. And so I don't doubt that if they could eat, that they could also have done other things among humans. But the argument is given against it, that it's not possible. The Bible doesn't say it's not possible. But that brings up argument number 2, and that is that the argument is given that angels do not marry and are sexless. And at first glance, this argument does seem to have some weight. In Matthew chapter 22, there's a question that comes up about the resurrection. And in answering that question, Jesus says in verse 30, for in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. I remember having this discussion with my grandfather. And he brought this up, and I said, well, Grandpa, I said, the scripture here says, in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like the angels in heaven. Doesn't say they're like the angels on the earth. And he looked at it and he said, you may have a point there. I don't claim to have all the answers, but I'm just saying that it is possible that something happened in Genesis chapter 6. It doesn't say that the angels are sexless like some people say, and Grandpa never said that. He said that they couldn't marry. But some people do take it that far and say that they're sexless. But for those people, I would say this passage doesn't say that, because people who share in the resurrection will surely retain their identity, whether they're male or female. I mean, we're not going to go on up into glory and somehow lose our gender. That's just some weird stuff. You'll be male, I'll be male. Our wives will be female. Furthermore, angels are always, contrary to what Hollywood and some others think, angels are always spoken of in masculine form. Always. With male names. Always. Always. Now, in this text, I believe that it's, in comparing this to Genesis chapter 6, I believe that it's against God's created order for angels to be marrying with humans. This is rebellion. But fallen angels don't care about that sort of thing. They didn't care about it back in those days. The angels of God in heaven are always going to do that which is pleasing to God. That's why there's no marriage of angels in heaven. But something happened in the pre-flood antediluvian world. And I believe we've got some other passages that speak of that. Go with me, if you will, to 2 Peter. 2 Peter chapter 2. Let's start with verse 1. Peter's writing about the rise of false prophets. Notice what he says. But false prophets also arose among the people, just as there will also be false teachers among you, who will secretly introduce destructive heresies, even denying the master who brought them, bringing swift destruction upon themselves. And many will follow their sensuality. Because of them, the way of the truth will be maligned. And in their greed, they will exploit you with false words. Their judgment from long ago is not idle, and their destruction is not asleep. Verse 4. For if God did not spare angels who sinned, here it is now. For if God did not spare angels who sinned, but cast them into the pit and delivered them to chains of darkness, being kept for judgment, and did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a preacher of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly. We'll stop there. But notice he's connecting something with the angels who sinned, who were cast into the pit to deliver them to chains of darkness, being held for judgment. He's connecting that with the ancient world in the time of Noah. Now, our question, is Satan and the other fallen angels, are they all bound now? And the answer to that is no, they're not all bound. But there's a group of angels, a group of fallen angels that the Bible speaks of that sinned above and beyond in such a way that they became bound, waiting for the judgment. Somewhere along the lines of the ancient world, the old world, the time of Noah. Over in Jude also speaks of this. Jude verses 6 and 7. And angels who did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper abode, he has kept in eternal bonds under darkness for the judgment of the great day. Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, having indulged in the same way as these in gross sexual immorality, and having gone after strange flesh, are exhibited as an example in undergoing the punishment of eternal fire. So he says, these angels who did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper abode, kept in eternal bonds. What did they do? What was it that was so terrible that they're kept under lock and key till the day of judgment? Well, I believe the answer is in Genesis. Again, in 1 Peter. 1 Peter chapter 3. Verses 18 and 19. For Christ also suffered for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, so that he might bring you to God, having been put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which also he went and made proclamation to the spirits now in prison, who once were disobedient, when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah during the construction of the ark, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. This passage right here has a controversy all its own. For now, I won't get into a controversy within a controversy, but it may be that those spirits that he's talking about that are now in prison could be speaking of those angels which were bound at that time. Christ may have gone to preach to them to show forth his power and success in completing the work that they tried to stop. That's one way of looking at it. Although I believe that that the fact is, the preaching of Christ in those days happened as Noah was building the ark. And those who are now in prison are those who died, who perished in the flood. So we think about these things. and consider the scriptures on this. Ultimately, what we have in Genesis chapter 6 is a part of the warfare that was spoken of. If you remember in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15, we bring this to a close. When Yahweh spoke to the snake, he said, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. Shall bruise you on the head, you shall bruise him on the heel. There's a war that's going on, war that was happening. I believe what was happening there in Genesis chapter 6 as the sons of God were going after the daughters of men, where Satan was unable to destroy the human race at Eden. I believe this was an attempt to destroy and corrupt the human race. To corrupt mankind and prevent the coming of the promised seed of the woman who would bruise his head. Apparently, he was nearly successful. But the line was preserved, I believe, as the human race was bottlenecked. Noah and his family being preserved on the ark, and the rest of the rest of what was left was destroyed. God was victorious over that battle. And so next time we'll pick this up and look at the rest of this passage. But